Oh, I did it. My right hand just pressed the start streaming button without my acknowledgement. Hey, y'all. So we're gonna work on some more Legend of Redneck. I just wanted to do one more work stream this week and just hang out. You know, I know that probably a bunch of y'all are at the end of your workday, so feel free to goof off, right? And if you want to draw something, talk to me about drawing. Um, I always love to talk about drawing. And I need to switch the camera here. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Cool. So I'm almost done with this. I'm almost done drawing this episode, I should say. I'm not done with like everything else, right? I do. Judy has the best expressions. Bar none. MVP. Current MVP in the Legend of Redneck for expressions. Although Lank has some pretty good ones too. I'm not saying he doesn't. It's just Judy's a very strong contender for fun expressions. So right now I'm finishing up this line art, getting it kind of shaped up, put together. And then we'll probably do some flatting. I think we're going to do flatting. I've been like trying to talk myself out of flat. Part of me, I should say, is trying to talk myself out of flatting today because it's tedious and here's the thing, it's tedious, but it goes really fast. Like every time I've ever flatted 2 pages of Legend of Redneck, I'm always done with it really fast. And I'm always like, oh, that wasn't so bad. But I always like not look forward. I always not look forward to it. I don't know why that sentence sounds strange. I always not look forward to it. Is that a? It doesn't sound right, right? Like I always do not look forward to it. I always feel reluctant about it. I always I'm never excited about it. That's what I'm saying. Because it's just like a it's funny because it's just like a brain turn your brain off type of activity. And that shouldn't be that big of a deal, but for some reason it is. I don't know why. I mean, life is full of things like that, right? Doing laundry, scrubbing the toilet, washing the tub, vacuuming the floor, mowing the lawn. I kind of like mowing the lawn a little bit, though. I haven't mowed a lawn in a long time, though. It's been a while. That's all I'm saying. It has been a while since I've mowed a lawn. But the thing about mowing a lawn is like you can kind of look back at your work and it's very obvious, right? Before and after. It's not as obvious before and after for a lot of other things, especially like vacuuming. I mean, and if it is obvious, you really needed to vacuum, right? I've certainly had points in time in my life where I've done that, where I was like, wow, I'm sure glad I vacuumed. Should have done that about 5 days ago. It's funny, I don't feel this way about cooking. Cooking is not tedious to me. I really enjoy cooking. And I think it's because the way that I cook is like really yeah, as a kid, especially like between the ages of what was that? I was like 13 and 16. I watched a lot of Iron Chef. That show was kind of a big deal when it first came out, and it was like the original Japanese show. It was pretty cool. I at that time when I was 13, my family had gotten cable TV for the first time. So I mean, that was already like exciting, right? Um, this began the epoch of like me discovering Toonami, and then like that was pretty much my life was like watching Dragon Ball Z and Robotech, random stuff like Tenchi Muyo and Inuyasha and Ronin Warriors. Although Ronin Warriors was not that good. It was just, yeah, Ronin Warriors wasn't that good. Anyway, if I wasn't watching Cartoon Network, though, I was also watching Food Network. I was really into, initially, I was really into three shows, right? Emerald. I don't know. Emerald is like kind of old hat now. I don't think most millennials remember Emerald. He is sort of this, he's like a TV chef, right? And he did a cooking show, and he taught you about cooking, and like he had a lot of you know idiosyncrasies, right? And he really liked to like play up a lot of his cooking instructions to make it exciting, right? Like his big thing was like it's so goofy nowadays, but his big thing is like he would always take like some kind of spice or something, and then he'd like throw it in the pot and go bam, and like the audience. This was the other thing that made that show kind of innovative for cooking shows is there was a live audience, right? So you had people interacting and clapping and laughing, and I'm sure there was like some of it was kind of forced, where it was like please applaud, that kind of stuff. But it was the first of its kind, right? Revolutionary for like TV cooking shows, because up to that point it was largely Julia Childs, Justin Wilson, shows nobody really like watched that much except for like my grandparents, and I would watch them. Well, I wouldn't watch Julia Childs. I don't know why. I just didn't. My grandmother really liked Julia Childs. For some reason, I just never watched her. Um, but I like Justin Wilson and his whole shtick. And you can actually like, there's a channel on YouTube that like streams 24 hours, like 24/7 Justin Wilson videos. And his whole shtick was like, he was this, down home Cajun cook. Who knows if he's actually Cajun? He certainly played the part well. And so he would like teach cooking like Cajun recipes, right? Well, anyway, going back to Emerald. Emerald's shtick was that he was like, I guess he was from New Orleans. There's debate about that, I guess. Um, but he was supposed to be from New Orleans, and so like a lot of his cooking was like Southern influence. So there's a lot of spice, there's a lot of alcohol involved. It was just like at that time, 1997 through 2000, I want to say, was kind of a revival for like United States interest in New Orleans as a city. And I actually had a conversation with my father about this recently, and he was saying that something that was a big impact for New Orleans as a city, I cannot remember the exact date that he gave me, but it was around that time ish. It was the World's Fair. There was a World's Fair in New Orleans, and so that like reignited interest in the city. And so there were other cultural things happening at that time other than just like Emerald Lagasse. Like there was the much, the infamous and much belated Mambo Number 5. uh, I like that song. I don't care what people think about it. It's a good song, and it's skeezy, but it's really good. But even you had, kind of a jazz renaissance too. I don't know if renaissance is a strong word. A jazz revival, going on at that time in the 90s. So, like, New Orleans was this big, has been and continues to be this really big jazz hub in the world. And, a lot of people like to make the claim, New Orleans was like the birthplace of jazz. I think largely because, Louis Armstrong had a huge presence there, right? And as well as like a lot of other jazz musicians historically for like a long time, right? Um, but anyway, there was this big kind of jazz revival that was happening around that time in the 90s, and who knows why. Like jazz revivals kind of come and go. Like there was kind of one in the 80s, although it was like a rockabilly kind of thing. Um, but like in the 90s, there was this point in the mid 90s where suddenly zoot suits were back and like jazz was getting incorporated into a lot of hip hop stuff. And then you had like Scatman John, right, who was like kind of a he had like a hot couple of minutes, right, during the 90s. There's a couple things going on. And this also led and fed into a small but nationally appreciable revival of interest in New Orleans as a city. Not the state of Louisiana, mind you. that's that's a different story. But New Orleans, right? So anyway, Emerald Lagasse was his name-o, and he capitalized on that, right? And so his show on the Food Network was huge, and I was really into it. I watched it a lot. So that was one of the shows I was really into on Food Network, and then the other one I really enjoyed was what the hell was it called? I think it was called Good Eats with Alton Brown, and so like he's still kind of like swimming around a little bit, but his whole shtick, like Alton Brown's whole shtick, was like, I'm a nerdy scientist guy, and I'm going to teach you about like how to cook things the right way because I'm going to give you all the chemistry type facts about how it works. How you have to cook foods at certain temperatures and all this other stuff. Um, that show was fine. I mean, I would watch it. I liked it. I didn't really ever quite get it or fully understand it, and I never really paid that much attention. That was a good show to have on the background. I guess that's the way I'll put it. But then there was Iron Chef. And Iron Chef, I mean, I was already like knee deep in the throes of like, anime hysteria because this was like the era of Gundam Wing, which blew my mind as a middle schooler. It was just like I love Dragon Ball Z and like I recorded that, and watched it religiously, but Gundam Wing, like for whatever reason, um for my middle school nerdy sensibilities at that time, it it was it was a very grandiose operatic show, you know? And so because of its grandiosity and like ridiculous situations and really kind of a soap opera too, a space soap opera, um, just pulled me in. And so anyway, really into anime in that moment. And so Iron Chef was like this additional step in, right? Into like Japanese culture and oh man, like the general premise I always thought was really cool, which was like, you know, every the competing chefs are given right like a an ingredient they both have to use. They have to incorporate into their main dish, but basically like anything goes and they have to kind of work with what they have available. I mean, to me as a creative person, this is sort of like how I create anyway. And I just always kind of found that weirdly inspiring and motivating because it was just a cool idea in my mind. And so that's kind of how I cook. A lot of the time, like I do incorporate like actual recipes more and more as I get older. But what's interesting is like as I learn recipes and incorporate them more, they also add to like my improvisational set of skills. So like I really like, kind of rummaging through the refrigerator and the cabinets and going like, okay, I got horseradish, mayonnaise, there's peanut butter. I don't know. What am I gonna? How's any of this gonna work? And then like grits. Okay. What's in the freezer? Shrimp. Okay. Maybe I don't know. Maybe some of the stuff I can make a sauce with it. Surely this could work out. I love that stuff. It's really fun. It's unfortunate that baking is not as forgiving as the rest of like the culinary arts. Like you can't exactly improv baking in the same way. It's it's probably the most scientific and rigorous of all the culinary whatever you call it arts, crafts, skills. And so I'm finding myself in this place of like, okay, how do I do want to bake more, right? I like baking, but I do have kind of a difficult time getting myself into the baking mindset because like I said earlier, there's the one issue where it does require an almost sort of blueprint style of creation. I think that's the best way that I can put it. You really have to work from a blueprint and follow the blueprint because if you mess it up, you mess up the whole thing. You got to start over. And it's a big mess, right? And and that's not as fun as the other improvisational cooking that I do. However, I will say pretzel making has like oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. One more thing to add to that is that the amount of time that you have to put into it is quite intense, right? Like I've been looking into how to make French baguettes because I want to learn how to make those. And even the simplest recipe has, 3 hours of downtime into it because you got to let the yeast rise, right? That's the thing about baking is if you don't have the patience to allow the dough to do its thing, you're just going to be completely destroyed every step of the way. And the only like dough or style of baking that I've found that is like not that long, like that isn't 3 hours of wait time, is pretzels. Pretzels you can make pretty quickly. Now I'm sure there are probably other things, right? Like in terms of like when I say baking, like I understand there are cookies and stuff like that. You can make those pretty quick. I'm talking bread, right? Like bread. Um, Turns out the more I don't know, like the more like looking into it that I've done, bread is like high level, like all bread for whatever reason is just like high level difficulty. And I think it's largely because you gotta rely on the yeast, and the yeast does what the yeast wants to do. You're like, you know, you're living by the yeast's time, the yeast's rules, pretty much. So because of that, baking turns out to be a little bit tricky. Now, when I say tricky, it's not like it's actually hard, right? It's not like it's actually that difficult in terms of technique. You know, the general techniques are like you fold the dough, you set it aside, you wait, you fold the dough, you set it aside, you wait. Really not that complicated. The complicated part is just fitting it into your day, right? It's like, oh yeah, I want to make a nice French baguette for, this dinner. Well, you got to plan it out, right? This is like movie production or something where it's just like you're planning out your meal prep the day before, even depending on how nice of a baguette you want to make, because I don't know, let's say you want to make a Polish, right, which is like a some weird yeast fermentation. It's this weird yeast fermentation thing that, like, you know the high class bakers use to make a very fluffy dough. So anyway, I haven't made a French baguette yet, but I kind of want to do that this weekend. I'm thinking about it. I keep like introducing the thought to myself, and I keep thinking like, oh, that 3 hour downtime seems like such a bummer though, and I bet it's not going to be that bad, because I was kind of concerned about that a little bit with pretzels, because I mean pretzels. Well, I should say specifically croissants really didn't take that long. I mean, it was like an hour and a half, which is still a long time, but it's not that long. And then like straight up pretzels, it's about an hour. It's about an hour. Maybe you could say an hour and a half. They don't. There's not as much intense amount of time waiting for it to rise as with the croissants. So anyway, because of all that, I find myself in this position of what will I do, right? Like, will I make that commitment? Because 3 hours. Here's the thought that goes through my head: 3 hours for a French baguette is an awful lot of commitment, and I understand that the actual work time of it, I mean, is probably 30 to 45 minutes. It's really not that long at all. Um, it's really just the like constant back and forth checking, troubleshooting, all that stuff that intimidates me. It really does. I don't know why either. It's actually kind of, I mean, it's weird that it should intimidate me at all. I've done probably more complicated things than that. It's just me and my American ways, I'm so used to convenience, right? But I mean, this was how bread was made for centuries before today, right? Before you could go to your local Whole Foods and pick up, you know, your organic grass-fed baguette, right? Like, and it's probably a very good baguette too. That costs, half your paycheck for the week for that one baguette, but it's organic. But the reality is, like, what I'm becoming aware of is, like, I can make a baguette that good. I mean, I don't actually know this yet, but I bet I could. I could at least make a baguette as good as a Whole Foods baguette on my own if I'm willing to put in the time and a little bit of elbow grease. Not that big of a deal. Look, after I got that pretzel victory under my belt, it did kind of light a fire in me. I was like, I can do this. I can bake. Anything else is possible. It's a good feeling, right? Like, people should have that kind of feeling in their life a little more often, because it does. That's very interesting to think about, actually, on a larger scale. So, like, yesterday I was sort of timidly complaining about commercialism and art and stuff, and I think, one of the main issues about our modern way of living is we are so disconnected to what makes our lives even possible, right? We're very disconnected from how we, get our food, get our everything, our water. Although I have to say, I mean, I wouldn't trade plumbing. You know what I mean? That's a pretty big one. Um, but like, our vegetables, our meat, our cheese, we're super disconnected from those processes. It's not like it's been that way for a long time. It's not like this is a new thing. It's just that when you reconnect with it, there is a certain amount of like, oh, people used to do this a little more often, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. I doubt most households made their own cheese. I could be wrong. I don't really know. But as far as bread goes, yeah, a lot of households did. They made their own bread. They made their own, sweets and whatnot, right? Well, we're super disconnected from that. We don't get our own milk. We don't really do any of that stuff. And it's a very interesting feeling to reconnect with that process, even on a little tiny scale. Even on something as simple as going to the store, buying a bag of flour and a little tiny packet of yeast, and you make a couple of poissons. And by the way, I mean, even with the poissons specifically, I cheated a little bit. I got like one of those Jack in the Box cans of crescent rolls. But with the pretzels, that was all, as they like to call, scratch made. Scratch made. I don't who. What a marketing term that is. Scratch made. Right, like you bought ingredients at a store and then made it. That's what you're saying. That's scratch made. Anyway, still, like even then, that process is still more connected with the heart of the skill, right? In the same way of like somebody who doesn't go to the oil shop to get their oil changed in their vehicle, right? They do it themselves. My grandfather did that on my mom's side. He would change his own oil in his vehicle. In his mind, he's like, I don't ever see why I ever need to like pay somebody else to do it for me. And he was probably right. I mean, as far as I'm aware, changing your oil isn't actually that difficult of a thing. It just like once again like baking bread or anything else. You just have to have the patience to do it, and also the willingness to get underneath a vehicle. That part I'm not like big on. Um, well, in understanding how the vehicle works too, and I think that's the main reason why most people don't change their own oil in their vehicle, right? Like, it's a big ask to learn all of the components of a vehicle, especially, in some ways vehicles are getting more complicated and in others they're less. I don't know. I just look at it and like I had this issue come up not that long ago, well, last year with my Jeep, where I was like trying to figure out what was going on with it, because it was like having these issues where it would randomly stall out. It was so bad. It was just like the I was like, I'll never be able to drive this vehicle. It's just totally broken. There's a lot of troubleshooting I had to do. It was awful. I hated it. But during that epoch, there were moments where I was like, well, screw it. I'm just going to try and see if I can fix it myself. Famous last words. So, in that time, I started learning a little bit about like the interior of my Jeep, what causes it to function the way it does. It was a really interesting time because I started to realize why, car mechanics might become car mechanics, because they probably enjoy the puzzle element of it, because it's like a weird puzzle. In something goes wrong in the vehicle, you have to do diagnostics on it. You have to figure it out. It's gotten easier over time because there's a lot of like computer diagnostics that exist nowadays. And like you can even go to like an AutoZone and they'll like help you do some diagnostics on your vehicle, and they'll give you some codes. But even then, when you get the codes, you still have to like kind of do a lot of guesswork. It's a very weird process. I mean, it's almost like going to the AutoZone is almost like going to a tarot reader. Like they can give you kind of the general assessment, but they can't give you any of the specifics. So you have to like guess and figure out and speculate on the specifics, and then at that point you're looking for signs and symptoms, and like, you have to allow time enough to pass that you go, aha, now I see what they meant. And it was still another half a year before that ever got resolved. And it did get resolved. Thank God. But it was only after like taking it to the car mechanic, like, I don't know, a lot of times. And at some point they were like, oh, okay, we found the problem. It's blah, blah, blah. It's this part. It had rusted over, and the reason why it would stop like it did was because it was rusted, because it's supposed to sort of like open and close at certain intervals. And, when I learned of this, I was like, wow, that would have been really nice to know like a year ago, to save myself all of this grief. an annoyance, and that, that incident just like really made it difficult for me to like do a lot of things. Anyway, it passed. It passed. Things got better. It was just like it was a long, annoying period, though. I'll just leave it at that. So anyway, I don't really remember how we got into talking about all this, but all I will say is because we don't understand how vehicles work anymore, it does put us in a position of being somewhat vulnerable to when they break down. Because then we have to rely on like going to the auto zone or the. I mean, I don't mind that. I'm just saying like, or the car mechanic or whatever, and we have to like live on their schedule, work on their schedule, etc., etc. And I get it. Like, there's only so much a person can do in the day, right? Like, maybe time to fix a vehicle isn't one of those things because it is a big ask, oftentimes. Although, I will say, once I started to look at, like, the economics of, like, repairing vehicles on your own, it became quickly apparent to me why, like, my grandfather pretty much did all the car repair when he could. And changes the oil on it for labor. And that labor costs quite a lot, and it comes at a premium because basically what you're paying for is like knowledge, because it is like it's like a priest class kind of knowledge. It's gotten more that way as time has gone on too. Is as vehicles have gotten more and more occult in how they work and more mysterious, the car mechanics find themselves in this curious position of being a priest class of sorts. And the same for the computer, the computer folks. I mean, I don't really have an answer to any of that. I'm just, all I can report on is what I observe. But, one has to ask, I feel like, how do I connect? How do I reconnect with that capability? Especially in a time as confusing and, chaotic as today. That's not a simple question to ask, because the day in which we live, our modern times, is extremely overwhelming. It's so overwhelming that sometimes I don't even want to be involved with it, right? But that's not like a way of going about it. You gotta like figure out where it is that you have any capability, control, say, and what goes on, and then do your best. And sometimes you'll fail, and sometimes, you'll learn something and grow as a person. And I think that should be the long-term goal, right? Is to like progress, growth. Although in terms of, that I'm getting into a new topic, right? And it's kind of a big one because yes, growth is great, but growing for just the sake of growing, you have to be careful with. I think there's a certain aspect of like, at a certain point, are you improving anything, or are you just like making your life complicated for no reason, right? Are you being a busybody, in other words? There's a distinct difference between those two things. And I think what distinguishes between being a busybody and like growing in the direction that is like proper and appropriate for you is like how much do you enjoy it and how much does it like resonate with the I'm going to use poetic language here, so forgive me, but with like the sanctums of your heart, right? Like how much does it make you feel like this feels right, this feels correct? So, for example, I've talked about this before in the past, but I've been really getting back into yoga the last month. And it's helped me a lot in terms of like getting back my core strength, my back strength. It was just like something that I needed because I had noticed that I had really, a lot of my aspects of my body had kind of atrophied a bit, and it was making sitting and in the chair like a very uncomfortable experience after like a short amount of time. Um, having back pain, all this other stuff. It was just terrible. And anyway, so I went back to yoga. I'm really glad I did because in a pretty, I mean, it's been at best a month and a half. Like, I haven't gotten my flexibility back. Not entirely. Sadly, I have not gotten all my flexibility back yet. I have definitely been more flexible in my life than I am right now. But I have been getting a lot of my core strength back really fast. And today was the first day that I tried for the first time, like doing a headstand. And I went for like a long time thinking to myself, I don't know if I'm ever going to try that. Like, that seems too difficult. That seems like kind of not me, was the thought that I had in my head. And fortunately for the place where I go to like practice yoga, they're very big. I'm like reiterating like, well, if you're not gonna make the attempt, at least practice the idea. Does that make sense? Right? Like at least kind of like lean in that direction. Let us show you like the step by step way that you would do it. So maybe you don't get to like the last step, but at least you can get to step 1 and step 2, right? Like breaking it down into more simpler steps. And so today I finally just like took those last 2 steps of like, and I used the wall as a prop. So like I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but that's okay. Like a lot of people do that, and that's how you get to the next level of like not using the wall as a prop, right? Like you start from where you feel more confident, and then you work your way to where you feel fully confident. So anyway, today was the first day where I did it, and I was like, as I was doing it, I was like, wait a minute, this is not as hard as I thought it would be. It was just kind of scary. And the main reason it was kind of scary in my mind was just like, I guess I realize upon reflection, like, the main reason why I hadn't even tried it was because I was worried about, well, what if I mess up? What if I fail? Like, will I really hurt myself? That kind of stuff. And as I was doing it, I was like, oh, this is kind of set up in a way where, like, I mean, you would just have to really not be paying attention to, like, really hurt yourself. I mean, you still could, but, they call it a headstand, but really, like, it's I was going to use the term shoulder stand. There is a pose called shoulder stand, but it more uses like your back and your neck. So like the back of your shoulders or whatever. A headstand, what it uses is like trapezius in like your, this area, and then like your arms, right? Doesn't really use your head that much, but it's called a headstand because you do look like you're standing on your head, and you kind of are. I mean, your head is touching the ground, but most of your weight should not be on your head, right? Like it should not be on your neck. Most of your weight should be all, yeah, all right here, right? This is this area. And so when I was doing that, I was like, okay, this is much more doable than I thought it was. Using the wall as like a prop helps too. And I really didn't use the wall that much. I just kind of it helped me in the sense that whenever my like feet tapped it, I was able to go, "Oh, okay, I'm like leaning too far back and I can readjust and lean forward." But it is, I mean, it's a good ab workout, that's for sure. Anyway, that was another one of those victories where I'm like, oh, okay, like I can do this more and better than I thought I could. So I think that that's like, if I wanted to like try and string this together into some sort of coherent thematic thing for the stream, I would say anything where you can like, even their small sort of seemingly inconsequential actions that allow you to feel degrees of like control on yourself and your environment and like what you can create and what you can do. um any sort of small little victories you can have in those spaces can be really reassuring for you in your ability to expand as a person. Like not literally expand like a balloon, but like, like do be capable of doing things you didn't think you were capable of doing previously. And I say this, specifically speaking as an artist. Like, I went for a long time not thinking that I was going to be able to do an entire book, like an entire comic book, right? It seemed like such a big and unwieldy task in art school that I really like avoided even the thought or touching it at all for a very long time. And I realized that like when I was younger, I'd always be coming up with ideas for stories, and I'd always kind of do the parts that like I liked and were easy and didn't really require any kind of commitment because there was no risk to it. So like character designs or like mostly character designs. There was a point where I started writing scripts, but I never did anything with the scripts. That never went anywhere. It wasn't until much later that it occurred to me like, okay, this is how the process works, right? You have your story figured out as best as you can, and then you just start going. You just start laying it out. You just start drawing. You don't worry too much about like, is it going to be perfect? No, of course it's not. Nobody's going to have a perfect story from the get-go. You could put years and years into one story, and you're going to have mistakes. They're going to show up. They're going to pop up. You can always go back and fix them. You can always make it better, but you have to sort of get comfortable with the idea that like You're going to have to break some eggs to make that omelet. You're going to have situations where somebody's going to go, I don't know if that makes sense. That doesn't seem, you know, it doesn't that doesn't quite work like you think it does. You have to go back and fix it and whatever. That's the creative process, right? But the only way you get engaged with that creative process is to just do the thing. There's no other, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. There's no other way to do it. Like, there's no other way to learn how to make pretzels than, you know, screwing up a batch or two. There's no other way of, like, learning how to fix a car other than blowing up your car or dismantling it and taking it apart and putting it back together again. You know, that's how that kind of stuff gets done. And that's generally how most, like, processes in life work. There's just, like, I think it's very easy for people to kind of get caught up in this idea that, well, technology will make things easier and faster and blah, blah, blah. Maybe, and even if it does, it's going to come at a price. Whether that price is like, literal money that you have to spend, or like having somebody secretly watch your every move every second of your day, or like whatever, there's always a price. So why not just pay the price that's so obvious and not even, and like ultimately kind of inconsequential? Because human beings have been paying that price in the past for centuries and never bothered them, right? It bothers us nowadays because we're in the constant sort of rat race mentality, perhaps, or perhaps, there's something we'd rather be doing other than that. There's a video game we'd rather be playing, or there's a friend we'd rather be hanging out with, or whatever. But I mean, the reality is like, yes, life is full of those really cool, fun things, but life is also full of like the vacuuming the carpet, or doing the laundry, or sweeping the floor, or, molding the cheese, baking the pretzels, flatting the pages, maintaining the social media page, or or whatever it is that you find yourself having to do that you feel is like kind of tedious, right? That tedium is just another part of life. Every living creature has to deal with some kind of tedium. And like, most living creatures other than us don't look at it as tedium. There are animals that would be completely happy just sitting in the sun all day, not doing a damn thing. And humans can even respect that and admire it, but whenever they try it, they like get antsy and bored and just like, I should be doing something else. I should be checking on my stocks, or scrolling through Instagram or Tinder or whatever. There's like a million other things I could be doing right now. And, if I'm not like constantly at the beck and call of society, I'll miss out. What are you missing out on? What do you feel like you're missing out on? I was thinking this earlier today. A lot of people live their lives like, and they talk about their lives like at the end of it, when they finally passed on from their body, there's going to be like an opportunity to post a big Yelp review. And it's like, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, this is what you get. And I say this too as somebody who like really heavily entertains the idea of like reincarnation or at least like some kind of spirit something. But even then, like I don't think you're gonna like I personally don't think you're gonna have much of a memory or like conscious awareness of that transition point from life to life. Like I just don't. I don't think that's a thing. Um, but like people live their lives in this very curious way where like they don't believe in an afterlife, but then they kind of act like they do, and they talk about life like they do. Like they talk about life like they're gonna get revenge on it if they complain about it enough, or like you know, uh, squabble or whatever. And it's like you don't get it. Like this is it. There's not there's not some other quality that you're gonna get out of life, in the future that's gonna like redeem all of your previous past mistakes or like redeem the mistakes of other people who wronged you. It doesn't work like that. Life just keeps going. Life keeps going after you're gone. Life keeps going after they're gone. And you might come back and life will just keep going. And the whole thing just keeps replaying itself or going forward or doing whatever. And I don't think that the mindset to adopt for that is to just like sit and complain and be a big old poopy head. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who it is that I'm like zeroing in on when I'm talking about this. Probably like myself in the past, largely. But also people that have been in my life who have just really like people who I love, but then annoy the hell out of me because I'm just like, what are you doing? Like this is what, like, as far as we know, this is what you get. This is what you got. Like, why are you wasting your time making your life miserable and the lives of those around you miserable? It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, anyway, this is a big old tangent. I don't know. I think my point is going back to my original point in regards to tedium. That tedium is in some way life calling you to be present, to be aware, to be like there, right? To like to not just like run away from, the moments that you get. Like, yeah, some of the moments that you get in life involve you chopping onions. Like that's life. Sometimes you gotta chop the onions. I mean, if you want to make something with onions in it, I mean, you don't have to. But if you want to make, like a gumbo, you're going to have to chop some onions. That's just the way of things. If you want to have a properly working vehicle, you're going to have to get the vehicle repaired. Either you do it or somebody else does it, but somebody's got to do it, right? If you want to make a story, you got to write it out. So maybe you have to do multiple drafts. Maybe you don't. It's different for everybody. But the only way you're going to know is by like participating in that process and like hammering it out and getting annoyed and like feeling frustrated and asking yourself, why am I even doing this? That's the process. That's how the process has always been. It's never been different, right? Like there's never been a point in history where the process wasn't like that. And just because we live in a period of time where, technology gives us I'm going to call it the promise, the seduction of like, we're going to make things easier for your life. You're not going to have to think about anything. You're not going to have to you won't have to do a damn thing. We'll take care of it for you. even if that is the case, you're going to find yourself bored again. And you're going to find life to be tedious again. It'll just be a new kind of tedium. It'll be the tedium of having too much fun. Or having it too easy, basically. And you'll find yourself in this position of like, I need to escape society and go back to the ways of my forefathers and foremothers and hunt again and mold cheese and all this other stuff, right? That's the future. And then, inevitably there'll be a point where you get bored of that and you go back to the technology and you're like, oh, it's fun again. You go back and forth and back and forth. But the point is like you can kind of stopgap that process a little bit by at least finding things in your life where you can sort of appreciably get involved and be in the moment as you're working on it, and like that can help you not feel so separated from life, because that's like, I think that's the worst thing that I see happen to a lot of people, and it's happened to me, is like you just feel separated from life. You feel separated from just like how things change and how things move, and I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for anybody, right? So like find those things in your life that even when they get tedious, you feel willing to like commit to the process, because on the other side you're going to like really appreciate what you're doing, enjoy the thing front to back, and then also find that it gets easier the more that you do it. And not only easier, but it gets more immersive and more fun and more fulfilling, right? So anyway, I'm going to leave y'all with that. I think that's enough out of me for today. And that's like an hour of me talking. I don't even know who wants that. Anyway. Oh, there is one thing that I want to do before I end the stream. I've been wanting to do this, and I want to make this like a regular thing, but I keep forgetting to do it. I do want to acknowledge people who sponsor me and support me on Patreon. I'm very thankful to y'all. So I'm just going to say your names real quick before we head out. Thank you to Troy Morris, Paul Rainwater, Pharmacist Judge, Leo Empire, Dark Lank, GFY, Sudi Shearwater, Danielle Rainwater, Matt Walters, John Durrett. And if you want to support me, feel free to. You can check out the link in the description. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day, a great weekend. We will do this again soon, and we will talk then. But anyway, have a good one. Bye.